Alright, so when I put my front end onto this car, I had to make my own brackets to hang the bumper and the lights and things like that. So when I put everything on, I made it where I could take the bumper off very, very quickly. It's literally two 10 millimeter nuts and bolts, and 2 zip ties is all that's holding the front bumper on. So I'm just gonna take the zip ties off and undo the bolts and take the bumper off real quick. Alright, so now that we have the lights, front bumper, and intercooler out of the way, now we're going to actually take the intercooler piping itself out, take the turbo out, and then just basically start getting everything ready to take the motor and transmission out together. Alright, so now that all of the intercooler piping is off, the intercooler, headlights, bumper, and everything else in the front. Next, I'm going to be jacking up the car, draining the radiator, taking the radiator out, and then starting this removable core support project. That shouldn't take that long. It should be about a $10 thing, and make putting in the engine and transmission a lot easier. So I'll get started on that. Alright, so now that the car is jacked up, I can drain the radiator and take it out and get it ready to cut the core support out. Okay, so now that I have the car jacked up, got a bucket underneath, I'm going to pop the drain cap off the bottom of the radiator and drain all of the coolant and water out of the radiator and engine into the bucket. Alright, I'm going to let all that drain out and then take the radiator out. Now that most of the water is drained out of the radiator and hopefully out of the motor, so it doesn't make a mess when we pull it, I'm going to take off the upper and bottom radiator hoses and pull the radiator straight up out of the car. Alright, so now that the radiator and front end and everything is off the car, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure and cut the core support in certain spots and get it ready to weld a bracket onto the bottom of it, so that all it's going to be held on by is 4 nuts and bolts that I'll just be able to easily slide off, undo, and then the whole core support will come off and make pulling the motor and transmission 1,000 times easier. Instead of snaking it over this, it'll literally just slide in and out, very similar to like a 350Z's front end. If you take everything off, you can slide everything right out the front. The first thing you want to do before you cut the core support off is you want to get a pair of needle nose pliers and just pop all of the little plastic pieces that hold up your harness that goes underneath the core support. You're just going to squeeze them, push them down so that the core support is out of the way and you don't cut the harness in half. When you're getting ready to cut it, the way I measured for mine was I looked at a couple different things, removable core supports and brackets that you could buy and things like that, and the cheapest I could find was $50. So I looked at their design and then looked at my core support and tried to figure out a way to do it. So what I did was I measured from this corner, marked it, measured about an inch towards the outside of the car, and made my cut line, and I did the same exact thing on the other side of the car, so that's how I know it's going to be equal on both sides of the car. So now it is time for the scary part of actually cutting the core support off. I will warn you, if you're watching this so far and you haven't figured it out already, you will need to be able to weld to do this removable core support, which I'll show you later on. But you'll see me make another cut here. I'm just cutting off the bracket that holds the hood pipe, I guess, which holds the hood up. I'm just going to be removing that because I have 4 hood pins on my fiberglass hood, so I don't need it anymore. It's just going to be in the way. So I'm just going to cut it off. Then I'm going to cut the core support off, and yep. Alright, so I'm sure that some of you probably just cut this and are freaking out now saying, oh my god, I just cut my core support out. What am I going to do? Well, it's really not that big of a deal. As I'll show you when we keep going, it's really easy. Even if you can't weld, honestly, you could do this. But now I'm just going to get a flap disc and I'm going to clean up the cuts, make them a little bit smoother, not as jagged, and get them ready to be mated up and welded and everything else. So, as you can see, it's not too hard to understand what we're doing here. We literally just cut it here and here. So when we lift the motor up, it makes it easier to pull out the front. But we're literally just going to put a bracket across the bottom here into this slot, drill 2 holes on each side for nuts and bolts. But literally, that's it. Alright, so it's not that hard to understand what I'm about to do here. I literally went down to my local Ace Hardware and spent about $10 and just nuts, bolts, locking washers, and this 3 feet, it's an 1/8 of an inch by 1 1/4 inch piece of weldable steel. Nothing fancy. I think it costs $6 maybe, $7 maybe, but it actually fits into that slot perfectly, and it's weldable. The core support is also weldable, so we can weld them together, no problem. Weld the nuts to the back of it easily, and it's cheap, which that was the whole thing. I was trying to keep this very cheap. I didn't feel like spending $50 on brackets or tubing the front end or anything crazy like that. If you look, this piece of steel fits perfectly inside of this bracket, where we will drill a hole here, which we might actually use this factory hole, drill another hole, weld nuts to the bottom of this piece so that we can just stick the bolts straight through the top and combine the two. Alright, so all you need is someone, for me, I'm not going to measure it, I'm too impatient. But I'm just going to have my brother hold it up for me. I'm going to put the piece underneath here where it needs to go, and then I'm going to put it up. Make sure it's equal. And then just mark it. You know where you need to line it up with the core support so that you can weld it. Alright, so after hitting it with our Harbor Freight welder, the results are actually really good. I'm really impressed with the welder. I use it a lot. It's more than paid for itself. I think I spent $80 after coupons on it, and I've stitch welded cars together with it and done metal fabrication like this, or fixed exhaust or made exhaust with it, but this is the finished product. Alright, so now that we have the other side cut and welded into place exactly how we want it, now we're going to do the same exact thing with the rest of the piece of metal, and just basically an exact mirror image. No different, 5 inches, same angles, same everything, just welded in. And then I'm just going to do that, and I'll come back when it's time to drill the holes and everything else. Alright, so once you've got both holes drilled all the way out and ready, you can then take your removable core support and put it where you want it to be. Take your marker and mark it. Make sure it's in the middle. And mark it. Mark your hole. Alright, so now that we've got both holes drilled on both sides, you just match them up to the holes that you had drilled in here. Since you mark it just fine. Just like these do. After we have our holes drilled, we have our nuts and our bolts sitting here. All we're going to do is put the bolt through the hole, tighten it up with a nut so that you have to make sure to have the nut centered, and then you're literally just going to weld the outside of the nut to the core support itself. That's it for this video. You can see that it's in very solid, and I don't even have a bolt right here. This side just has 1 bolt because I bought 3 of one size and 1 of the wrong. Thanks guys. Like, subscribe, comment, do whatever you want. Don't do anything at all. That's up to you. I just hope you enjoyed the video.